I can hear you. What's up, Saba? Almost getting there. Ready to talk some OnlyFans? I got a hand wave on that one. All right. I think we can jump into it, Ken.
Sure.
All right. Well, welcome back. Welcome back, everyone. Thanks for being here. Welcome to Creative Briefs, our weekly recap of the top news and analysis from the creator economy. Every week, we're going to bring you a roundup of the latest news, our own analysis, and some deep dives on key topics in the creator economy. We do go live on Fridays at 8 a.m. Pacific time, and you can find out more over at created.show. We stream on Facebook, YouTube, Twitch, sometimes Clubhouse, and Twitter Spaces when we remember. And
don't forget LinkedIn.
And LinkedIn, of course. I need to update these, but yeah, we're also on LinkedIn at the same time. So pick your poison, whatever is the best way for you to consume this content. We appreciate it. You can follow along also, of course, on our Twitter. We are often sharing these links, so make sure to do so as well. I guess I should share the deck so that people can know what I'm talking about. But this is episode 4 of Creative Briefs. Feel free to follow us. We're a creative economy everywhere you can find us, on Twitch, YouTube, Twitter, even Flipboard. And that's not supposed to be shown yet. So, Ken, how's it been? It has been an exciting week in news. So many things, actually, and it was very hard picking what we were going to cover this week, actually.
I think for me, I guess since we've been doing this show for so long, like I found myself, and this is kind of embarrassing to admit, but I was humming that theme song in my head yesterday for some random reason. I don't know why. It's like, oh, okay, let's get ready for the show. Wait, it's not until today. It's not until tomorrow. Like, okay,
I can make a special arrangement for you to have that song on your phone.
Well, this is true, but no one's calling me, so I would never hear it. It's very strange, but you are completely correct that this week has been pretty busy. I think what's come up is that every time we do the show, we do Creative Briefs, there's always that lag in terms of the news early on in the week, and then right when you hit Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, boom, you're inundated with these big headlines that come out, and that's really takes up a bulk of our show. So I think without further ado, why don't we just dive right in and start talking about it?
Yeah, we got a lot to get into, and of course, we had planned a deep dive, an entirely different deep dive, but now this is where we are. So
that's what you get with the news, right? But Greg, I think if you recall a few weeks ago, right? I think prior to actually us starting Creative Briefs, when we kind of rolled in news with our interview into the Creative Economy show, our weekly Wednesday show, you talked about, the future of APIs in the social audio space, right? And you made this remark about how, you kind of wanted to see Twitter doing some sort of API for its Spaces feature. And you had some conversations with Twitter. And I'm not going to say that you kind of led this development, right? You kind of spurred this development. Clearly. They should clearly hire you for this or for ideation. But this week, Twitter announced that they're adding a support and endpoint support for Twitter Spaces in their API. It's not as robust as you might expect. It's obviously early stage for Twitter, for their development platform. But what's notable about this is that you're going to be able to discover and search for available spaces, right? I kind of want to call them rooms because that's kind of like what they are, but rooms are more associated with Clubhouse. So I guess we'll stick with spaces. But here you go. They're shipping 2 new endpoints on Spaces API, on the Twitter API version 2.0. And it's basically going to allow, to allow users both on and off the platform to discover Spaces more readily, right? And I think that's a problem with Spaces now. It's really hard to find them. And I kind of wonder, like, why?
There's a dedicated tab now for Spaces in the Twitter app itself.
Well, you might actually have it because you're on iPhone, correct?
Oh, you don't have that one yet?
I don't have it on Android yet, and
Okay.
I've updated my stuff, and it's probably one of those rolling releases that they're going to do. I mean, it was pretty quick for them to eliminate fleets for everyone, right? So that was pretty, that gone away really quickly, universally. But but unfortunately, I don't have that extra Spaces tab yet.
All right, you'll have it soon enough.
Yeah, I honestly can't wait.
I guess, Ken, my only pushback, I guess, or not pushback, but I guess my only hesitation in being more excited about this is that, yes, I think like the discovery aspects are still critical, but as like a content creator, as like us as 2 individuals, like creating a show here, programmatically being able to do this, I think is actually still the thing that I really want the most, right? It's my biggest gripe with a Clubhouse as well, right? You still have to manually go in there and use the app to type in and create, your events, and it's a huge pain in the ass. And like for us with 2, soon to be 3 shows, say a week, that's just a lot of overhead that I can't manage with any scale or efficiency.
I think what Twitter's trying to do though is they're taking a more cautious approach. They're doing the walk before you run.
They're doing what's reasonable,
right? Very reasonable to do, right? It's like get people more familiar with what Twitter Spaces is, and then make it more accessible to the power users, to the creators like ourselves. Because what would happen is, like, Greg, you can go ahead and maybe there's some integration with like StreamYard or with Zealous to programmatically do this, right? To set up a Spaces or a room. But then if it's not familiar with the average individual, how would you would get no audience anyway, so it'd be kind of defeats the purpose. But really, kind of to really sum it up, here's what I've highlighted here on this TechCrunch article. It's kind of really what you get from it, right? It's you're going to be able to look up live and scheduled spaces using specific criteria such as their ID, both the Spaces ID, which is kind of like a crapshoot. I don't know about that, but you can also look by the host Twitter handle or by specific keywords. So that could be good from maybe an SEO standpoint later on. If Google or Bing or Yahoo decides to roll the, support those type of things. Then they're also going to give, I think this might be a little bit of a benefit for creators, perhaps, being able to look at things like metrics such as how many people are in a room, the speaker count, the host profile, detected language, start time, schedule time, creation time, and whether a space is ticketed or not, right? And that could be maybe at least a starting a good entry point for appealing to creators.
Sure.
So very interesting to see how this goes. I know, Greg, you've talked to them a lot more, so I'm sure they'll probably be reaching out to you again.
It'll continue to evolve.
Yeah.
I think it's still early. There's not much else here yet to see. So I think, let's hope for more fast. And just to pull the thread a little further on Twitter, we did come across a new hire that Twitter just made. There's a lot of talk of this idea of moving towards like decentralization in general. We're going to touch on this later when we talk about OnlyFans as well. But Twitter has hired a guy named Jay Graber, I think is how you pronounce it. And he's been brought in to sort of lead up Twitter's initiative to sort of decentralize. Apparently, Twitter has a project called Blue Sky, which is specifically designed or was chartered to sort of help figure out how to decentralize Twitter in a more interesting ways. And so according, it says here that, Blue Sky organization will operate independently, but to date has been funded and managed largely by employees at Twitter. So hopefully there will be some further growth in this arena. I think like what's interesting about this idea, and I think that there is still a little bit of overzealousness, if I can say so, like about decentralization, because I think most people who are calling for it are frustrated, but have not necessarily thought through all of the implications of everything being decentralized.
Mhm.
And so inherently, as Matt,
Sorry.
you're hearing that, Matt and I were talking about the other day, the nature of social things is for them to be centralized, right? Like it's sort of like inherently about getting to like recognition. My point to Matt, though, I think is that in the universe of decentralization is there is also like federalization and using something like federation, sorry. But if you use something like, or analogies like DNS, which is an agreed upon standard and protocol, but also a highly scalable horizontal sort of technology, you can see how you can have success, but it takes a long time to get to the point that there's agreement for those things to be viable. So it'll be interesting to see what a decentralized Twitter looks like and to what extent Twitter can disrupt itself as well.
I think the decentralized theme will play out as we get closer to the rest of the news here. So
yeah. So let's go to our next story.
Yeah, so I think the next big one here is this article in the information about with basically just an interview with YouTube's chief business officer. And Greg, you and I have kind of gone back and forth in terms of like where does this fit in terms of the news that we want to cover this week. But there's some points here that I kind of want to cover here. Is I mean that having an interview with a YouTube executive is not like uncommon. There's been a lot of these big publications do get these type of exclusives. But what's notable here is that YouTube's basically admitting that they kind of missed the boat in terms of these short form videos, and they kind of like misjudged TikTok. And I think that's probably a common statement we see from a lot of these big tech platforms, like, oh, they kind of misjudged the popularity of what TikTok's been doing. They misjudged what, ephemeral content, those type of things. And so now they're kind of they roll out their own versions of it and to try and keep up with it. And we know that YouTube Shorts, the TikTok competitor, has been viewed 15 billion times a day, according to YouTube. We've talked about that previously. But here you go, right? This is a pretty good, interesting quote from Robert Kinsel, the YouTube's chief business officer. "We were missing the easy to use, low table stakes format. That's very critical to the next generation of creators who are coming up." Right. And then he kind of goes on and talks a little more about like what with Reels and all this other stuff. And then it's whether or not would YouTube kind of like unbundle Shorts from the core app. And the Robert Kinsel's response is like, no, that was never in consideration. Let me see if I can find that quote here. But he's basically said like the core app, YouTube's core app, that's where there's a lot of discovery and reach is for creators. And so why would you separate Shorts from that? Because that, if in terms of unbundling, that would do a disservice to creators.
Well, I think we're still very early days in the evolution of all of these things. I'm more interested, I guess, TikTok's success, the delta between sort of long form content, and this sort of short form content. I think we had ephemeral short form. Now we have like, permanent or sort of like permalinked short form content. I don't know, like what's the destiny of all of this in the long term? We keep finding more ways, we keep finding more formats, more media for us to drop into. So I think it'll be interesting to see what happens. YouTube being late to the game doesn't matter. YouTube has tremendous reach, tremendous breadth, and certainly they're a darling of most creators because they are still one of the few places that properly, I would say, are closest to properly helping monetize creators. One of the other things that was noted in there, though, was just also that, like, for example, they're trying to work to remove overly commercial content for YouTube Kids.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think this is laying back into the heavy-handedness of like platforms, and we'll touch on this again in a deep dive. But I think it's still interesting. There's still these themes that do crop up, here and there, or sort of recurring throughout all of these different services and products.
They do make a Kinsel actually puts a little shade on TikTok, right? Because it's like, and to your point, Greg, with what you the scalability, basically the scalability of YouTube is that it's multi-format, right? It's not just like, oh, we're just long form videos, right? They can do long form videos. They can do basically the equivalent of TikToks. And so Kinsel's like, basically a quote here says, I think TikTok as more of a single format company, very successful, but a single format. The format expansion is important to the sustainability of the audience and sustainability of the revenue stream, right? So I think giving what YouTube's philosophy here is that you give creators multiple formats, do what they feel is best, but you still have the power of that network effect of YouTube, and that can drive revenue monetization opportunities for creators. And YouTube wins either way because they win by displaying ads, and they get a take from they get their commission from taxing the creators as well. So
Yeah, well, we'll see. I mean, I think you develop products to service the market, and that's ultimately what leads to the revenue. So,
yeah.
On to our next story. Roblox acquires Discord competitor Gilded. TechCrunch has a quick article touching on this, and I just wanted to sort of give some attention to it. I think what we found, we're seeing sort of this growing sort of importance of community as a whole, and sort of the value that community can play in developing and creating new opportunities for businesses as we move forward. It's interesting to see Gilded, which was a fairly much smaller competitor, relatively speaking, to Discord, but they were acquired. And Roblox, I think, was also obviously had a strong Gilded community as well. But it's great to see that community is getting some of the attention it needs increasingly, and I think that the idea of community-led businesses is growing. And I think that that's an important part also to sort of this concept later that we'll get to on decentralization and sort of the sturdiness of sort of opportunities as they may exist or not exist. But that was all. I just wanted to give a quick mention of that. We can move on to our next one.
Cool. So in terms of, I think earlier this week, or actually earlier this month, Substack announced that they were going to expand their pro offering, as it were, to cater towards comic book artists, right? And it's funny, this came up actually. I went over to my parents' place this last weekend and picked up a bunch of stuff from my room, and wound up picking up a lot of my old comic books. So this week I was kind of sorting through them. So this is kind of very timely as I look at it. But the point here is that and Greg, this kind of relates to what you're talking about with the Legion article in terms of the gig economy and creators being businesses and so on and so forth, right? Because comic book artists some of them are actually leaving the big publishers, that being Marvel and DC. And they're upset about the contracts, right? Because they're over the intellectual property. They can write and create and design the next Batman, Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, X-Factor, X-Men comic, but then they won't necessarily retain that intellectual property, and especially if it may be going to like a movies or something like that, right? So they don't have as much control over their contracts. So they're basically taking their talent and they're going to Substack, where they might be able to facilitate that, right? They may be able to maintain ownership of those type of things. So Business Insider has this article behind a paywall, and they're kind of really just saying like, look, this is what's happening. This is not a fluke thing. Business Insider is suggesting that more comic creators could be opting to go that route. I mean, it's very similar to when Substack started to, I don't want to. I'm not saying using the word poach in a negative fashion, but basically lure journalists away from their big publications, from like Bloomberg or New York Times or so on and so forth, and starting their own publisher, their own newsletters, those type of things. So, I mean, I guess this is probably going to be you're going to see more of these type of situations where people that are artists and creators and writers and designers that have traditionally worked for within in-house, not as freelancers or independent consultants, that are going to move over to Substack and basically see if they can own a bigger piece of their worth. So,
yeah, Substack is still a conflicting kind of platform to me. There's a lot of discussion about what its viability is and not whatnot. I'm moving on to our next article, though. Sam Lessin actually had an interesting tweet. And there's a very big debate. I think we need to have probably a longer conversation on this. Maybe this should be one of our deep dive topics as well. But Sam was talking about basically why micropayments, sort of related to your topic, Ken, like why micropayments for journalists don't work actually, right? And he sort of lays out a couple of reasons here. He points out these these three things that three ways to pay for content is basically, and I don't know that I agree entirely with that these are the only three, but he says subscription, sort of consistent prepay. He says number two is sort of crowd-funded one-off prepay. And then he says number three is post-pay micropayments, one-off payments after. And there's a lot of debate about the value of content, individual willingness to pay for content, and how to figure out the right pricing model and the viability of this. And in the Means of Creation Discord, if you're not a member, highly encourage joining. Our friend Anna Dante, she had some good feedback in this thread, and I just wanted to read a little bit from what she said. She pointed out three things about why you may not want sort of this micro content opportunity per se, but she said you have recurring revenue, stable income on which you can rely. And she said, honestly, I could stop here. But she said it's also easier to build a publication around it, right? So by understanding what people value in your subscription package, it's also easier to build product for that audience, as you already know their spending abilities and a lot about the niche, which means you have validated customer base and a validated pricing strategy. And I do think, I don't know that there needs to be an either or per se, relatively speaking, right? I do think content creators, all entrepreneurs in general, are wise to experiment with different pricing models. I think it is hard to build a sustainable business, certainly one that supports you on the whims and ad hoc sort of tipping and donations, as opposed to sort of something more steady state that gives you a bit of predictability. I think it is also hard as a creator to get to the point that you deliver enough value to someone that you can extract a recurring amount of money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think most people underestimate. Now, our friend Bart from Centipenny is a strong advocate, obviously, of sort of the micropayment sort of movement. I'm all for it, I guess, to some degree, but I do tend to lean towards the idea that micropayments themselves, unless you have a sufficiently scaled and sized opportunity, and sort of infrastructure or platform, still kind of suffers from these micro fiefdoms. Do I really want a micro economy or microcurrency around a specific site? Do I want $5 to spend at the New York Times, right? Only that seems even more annoying to me actually than just paying them $5, than paying $5 and then having to decide how I want to spend it. Right. So I don't know. I think Medium is probably the closest to trying to do this model, but they also automate away you having to actually make that conscious decision. You just sort of as you consume. I feel like that's a pretty natural model. Your consumption is the heat map of where the value was created, and auto deploy it for me. So I think it'll be interesting. I do think we should probably have a longer conversation around this and just some of these economic models as they change. But a good tweet, some good feedback there. And we will share out links to it also in a bit, so you'll have a chance to read it for yourself.
All right, and so without further ado, we've covered all the news, and so we'll come back next week because that's basically it. There's nothing else that happened in the world. No, all kidding aside, I think the biggest shockwave, if you will, the bombshell, is that OnlyFans has announced a significant change to their business model, right? And or to the policy. And
there's some, even in this, or even here, there's not full clarity on what happened, right?
Well, we can let's talk about just the factually what the policy is, and then because once you get that, break it down, then like it gets a little bit complex. In short, TLDR, OnlyFans says no more sexually explicit content, no more pornography is going to be allowed on their platform, right? There's but you're allowed photos and video of nude photos and videos, as long as they don't run afoul of OnlyFans's policy, which is kind of like, okay, what the hell do you mean? Can you add? That's where a little bit more clarity is coming into play. And then there's a bunch of other stuff that's still up in the air, and a lot of outrage amongst the 130 million subscribers, users that OnlyFans has. But bottom line is, they're not going. OnlyFans says no more sexually explicit content, videos or photos allowed starting in October. The reason that OnlyFans says is that it's to comply with requests from its banking and banking partners and financial. So there was some outside influence that caused OnlyFans to make this tremendous change.
So I think today I was listening to Creator Upload, another podcast on the space. They were describing it, and I hadn't seen this anywhere else, Ken, so I'm kind of curious if you've seen it, as some kind of OnlyFans TV thing that was being launched.
Yes. So let's break down this timeline, right? So earlier this week, OnlyFans launched an app, first app on iOS and Android. They never had one because it would run, it would be run against the policies of Google and Android.
Not allowed, and they didn't want to pay to 30% to Apple.
I'm not sure about that one, but I'm probably sure that's probably the case as well. But it's if you use the only OFTV, which I think that's the official name of OFTV, is you can only see safe for work content. So vlogs, videos on meditation, yoga, cooking, blah, 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 all those type of things. So it's very wholesome type of app, right? Okay, great. But it kind of really strips away the a big part of what made up OnlyFans, right? And so that happened, I think, what day was it? Let's say it's Wednesday. Tuesday or Wednesday, earlier this week. Then yesterday, this article, the bombshell, OnlyFans says, haha, we're changing everything up. Wait, okay. And then it also comes out on this ahead of a BBC article investigation, where the BBC was asking questions about OnlyFans's moderation policies around illegal content. And apparently OnlyFans, according to the reports, has done some less than reputable stuff around illegal content. And we're not talking about like sex videos, but we're talking about things like bestiality, other like real like major illegal content, those type of things, right? So like that's the timeline of where we're at now, and we're seeing a lot of conversation around with sex workers who are like, what the hell, OnlyFans? Like, we're really pissed off because you basically are abandoning us. We made a living off of OnlyFans, and you've abandoned us. We need clarity. Nothing of the sort has come from OnlyFans at this point.
Well, all right. So who cares what OnlyFans is saying? I think obviously they're being a little bit obtuse here on purpose, right? So there's a lot of discussions here, right? So last night I raised, and there's a lot of blowback in various ways, right? So let me lay out some of the things that I've seen so far, right? Of course, Legion was losing her mind. As she said, her blood was boiling because these dirty bastards were screwing creators.
Right.
And this is the inherent risk of building on any platform, right? Like if you build on a platform, You are at their whims. The thing I'd said to you last night, Ken, was that, however, everyone has a boss. And so every platform runs on top of other platforms. And when those platforms decide that they're unhappy about something, you have to do what they say also, right? So I think this is like one part of the problem, right? Like, to your point, if it's the payment processors who are being prudish or risk averse or whatever way it may be, right? Last night I heard that there was apparently some pressure from like conservative groups to sort of like on their banking partners or whatever it may be to sort of ban, who's this? Ayala has like this point. She says, is OnlyFans banning porn? I don't know, but this is a reminder how payment processors are a de facto legal system, policing what adults are able to do, right? So the point is that platforms are not fully independent as we would like them to be, right? And so, for example, let's take, Donald Trump was a big supporter of a platform called Parler, right? When Parler decided that they were going to, pushing out content that incited violence and the Capitol attacks, et cetera, Apple said, hey, you're down. Well, then Parler's like, well, maybe we'll move to another place. And guess what? Then Amazon says, go screw yourself. Like, we don't want to host you either, right? And so this is an inherent risk for anyone who builds on a platform. Now, that is not just social platforms. All those platforms rely on things. There's a deep stack of things that we use and leverage. And so unless you can own every piece of the stack, it's very, very difficult, right? For you to actually have complete autonomy.
And only a handful of companies, a very small handful of companies actually own the full stack. And that would be like Amazon.
It's very difficult, right?
Google, Microsoft.
There's physical wires running in the ground, right? And someone owns them. And so like government still ultimately can mandate and control like what kind of interoperability and openness is required, right? But, it's difficult. So there's this one problem, right? Yes. So let's get to Matt's point. Matt says, full decentralization for social platforms will never exist. Let's stop acting like it's an option. Okay, great. So I want to point out the second problem that, of course, if anyone thinks I have a problem with Legion, I don't. I just actually have a problem. I have a problem with not providing a little more context, right? And I think it's easy to just be at the extreme and bring out the pitchforks every time. But the reality is this. Decentralization doesn't work either per se, right? So let's pretend. I was chatting with Matt about this also last night. Decentralization is great. Crypto is great for you if you want to solve the problem that OnlyFans is facing, as long as you don't need fiat, right? If you don't need money, right? Physical dollars, yeah, great. You can sell all the crypto garbage you want, right? Like you can get as much Bitcoin, you can sell as much of your own coin, you can do anything you want. But the second you need to have cash, say to pay your rent, right? Then you are screwed, right? Because this crypto is not cheap to turn into fiat. And when you decide you want to turn into fiat, you know who you have to work with again? Those same processors, right? And those same banks who want to hold your money. Now go talk to all the cannabis people who are sitting on big piles of cash in their basement that can't actually put it into a bank because literally the banks don't want their dollars, right?
Right.
It's the same problem, right? Decentralization is interesting, but it does not work until it is everywhere, right? Like, yeah, sure, you can run on borrowed time on people's computers. You can serve images and all kinds of stuff in all these various ways. It's not that the technology fundamentally fails. It's the bureaucracy and all of the other parts of the system that eventually get in the way of those things being successful today. Not that they won't ever be per se, right? I think there are some models, right? But there is other things going on than just saying, screw the man. We don't want to have like this part happen here, right? So OnlyFans could switch to crypto. Great. How are those people going to pay their rent, right? Because guess what? They can't do it on their own, right? Like you can't use crypto to pay your rent. Now, maybe you're in a very fortunate situation where you found some kind of like, landlord who's like, I'll take your Bitcoin for, for rent or whatever it may be, right? Great. Is your host going to take Bitcoin, right? Is your payment processor going to take Bitcoin? Because the Bitcoin process, all the crypto stuff is still so complicated to get into that most of them can't use credit cards even to onboard new dollars. And guess what? Those credit card processors don't want adult content. They don't want drug deals. They don't want this other stuff. Now, we can have a different argument about whether or not that's right, meaningful, or useful. That's separate, however, from the actual realities of operating a business that way today, right? So problem number one, right? Platforms have owners, platforms have dependencies as well. But if you build on a platform, you can do it. Now, I was also pointing out, though, as we always point out, that creators should try to build their own independence, right? And what that really points to, though, is actually a fundamental problem, Ken. So when Lee is complaining, and Matt pointed this out too, when Lee's complaining that, hey, they robbed these creators, what about the $1.6 billion they did pay out, right? You know what? They were doing something that Patreon wouldn't let anyone do, right? Like Patreon didn't allow that content, which is part of why OnlyFans got as big as it got, right? Which is part of why they had the success that they had. That $1.6 billion is nothing to smirk at, right? Like that's real dollars being paid to a number of people who didn't have that money before, right?
But I agree, but I disagree in the point where yes, that these adult content workers, these creators, will helped generate the success that OnlyFans got, right? And but they also got paid for it, right? Now, and 1.6 billion is not something to like, like, oh my God, like really? That's no, that's a big chunk of money to creators. I think where these creators that are outraged are what they're upset about is that they were a big part of OnlyFans's rise, right? They helped usher this in, and then all of a sudden, at the top, OnlyFans management is like, okay, we gotta switch over to something more.
You like being upset doesn't matter. Like you have to deal with reality. So if OnlyFans can't bank any dollars anymore, it goes to zero, right? So what's better? Like, hey, we have to make this change. Now, whether or not they're making a change for the right reasons, et cetera, like a separate discussion, right? Mm-hmm. But if you're going to lose your payment processor, right, like, and then not be able to actually pay anyone, right? That how is that better, right? Like I get the complaint, but remember your history. How were you able to make money before? You weren't, right? Mm-hmm. Like you didn't have this option. So I guess it's like I look, it's not that I'm not saying like don't be upset. I guess I'm saying be realistic though, right? Like,
so your point. So say your point, right? Your previous venture at Shoot, right?
Yeah, say crap to us.
Right. Well. Let's take it for example. Like, say you had a bunch of the backbone, Shoot grew based off of the tween influencers, right? That helped raise, like, oh my God, you raised like billions of dollars in revenue and blah blah blah. You were a great success because of the tweens, and then all of a sudden you're like, you know what? We are now only for older adults, and we're gonna block any content about blah blah, anything for tweens. And then that strips away that big percentage of your revenue. That's kind of what I see as the equivalent of what's happening here. I mean, that's a very, very rough interpretation of what's happening with OnlyFans. Like, you would still take the same stance?
Yeah, well, I take the stance that as a business owner, I do the things that drive the sustainability and the revenue and profitability of like my choices, right? So for example, if the government stepped in and said that I had to like moderate every piece of content that went through and it became cross prohibitive, right? Like, or like 10x more expensive, maybe that pathway is just not viable for me anymore, right? So I'm certainly not making the case that creators on the platform have nothing to be upset about. What I am making a case for is that, one, there's a market opportunity to still continue to service. Like the payment processors only care once you get to a certain scale, because ultimately the risk associated with those dollars from their point of view, right, grows to a point where it's potentially damaging to their books, right? Like a Stripe doesn't want to do it and have 5% of the money or dollars it's processed being put up and enraged, right? Like in some way or another. So that's why Stripe comes down on it. But all the time up until now, they got away with it, which means that someone could come along and actually still say, great, I'm going to do it again. I'll start it over. We'll build up to a different point, right? So there's one part of this equation is, much like the adult industry has always been an innovator in content and formats and other things like that, there will continue to be ways that they will find to process the dollars that need to be processed.
Yep.
Is it going to be as convenient as like having it in an OnlyFans? No. What that should point out to you is how important discoverability is, however, and all the other benefits you were getting for the dollars that you were putting in there. And absolutely 20% is, I think, I wouldn't call it like an egregious take rate, but it's certainly like, it's a meaningful take rate, right? But that 20% was mine. You didn't have to do any Apple stuff, right? Because you weren't paying the other 30%. You still have to host, and you would still have to advertise and acquire customers. And this is the part that I think everyone keeps leaving out of this, is that you have to figure out how to get those customers, and that is not free, right? And so the marketing, the cross-pollination, the discovery, all those things have value that we keep glossing over, right? Like when we bash the platforms, we're glossing over how important discoverability is. And decentralization works exactly in the opposite opposing force to discoverability, right? Like it inherently creates silos that makes it more difficult for you to grow the audience size that you are growing in more centralized platforms.
So, and the means of creation Discord, there was somebody that suggested that basically said that the OnlyFans discovery feature now is abysmal. So, like, I think they have a discovery issue. Regardless.
It's abysmal relative to like what you would want it to be, right? But is it abysmal relative to, hey, where's the place I can go find a bunch of adult content, right? No, it's not abysmal, right? Like that's freaking powerful as hell, right? Like, so everyone who complains is complaining against the perfected state of the world. And I'm just too realistic to ever screw around with like perfection, right? Like this is you like, yeah, everyone will complain they don't have everything they want on a platter. Well, guess what? Grow up. You're an adult. You're running a business. That's not how it works.
So, Greg, I think we're talking about from the creator side, but seeing how influential you are in shaping products. I mean, let's look at what Twitter did with their API, right? So for those, say OnlyFans is listening, right? They very well could be, right? Who knows? This is going to be available on YouTube, right? And what would you say to management, to product leaders at OnlyFans now? Because what's happening is they now have to remarket themselves, reposition themselves in a way, right? It's sure they have that brand name of OnlyFans, although are they trying? They are kind of running away from that reputation of, hey, oh, OnlyFans, it's like Patreon, but adult content. So they got to run away with that and say, oh, OnlyFans, we have a lot of other stuff that were more wholesome. But they also have to deal with potential creator attrition, user attrition. Like, I'm not doing it. So they're gonna lose people. I don't know how many, but we'll see. 130 million. What could that come down to? We'll see over time. What would you say in terms of where do they go next? How does OnlyFans, what is their strategy? What would you tell them?
Well, it's a good question. And I wish I had a fully thought out answer, but I would say there's a few parts here, right? One, I don't think they have escape velocity from their adult orientation, right? Like I feel like too many people, like you say OnlyFans, like everyone smirks, right? Like, I guess name me a company that started adult and made it actually escaped being labeled as adult, right? Like I don't know of one really, right? Like, so it's a very difficult sort of taint to get off of you, right? Like once you're in there, and it doesn't matter how many like celebrities or whatever you try to glom on to like, or revitalize the brand or what's that word?
Refresh, reinvigor,
recuperate, or like, I forgot what it is, right? But refurbish, like that you sort of like, and I can't remember it, right?
Repair, so I get you.
I think it's challenging for them to actually escape this. Now, so from a product point of view, if I was thinking about like how to solve this problem, one opportunity, and I don't know how valid or viable this would potentially be to OnlyFans turn it into a platform and redeploy it to the edges. And so enable all of their creators to actually offer their services, provide a centralized discovery platform, and improve the discovery parts, and then still take you could still take potentially a percentage, but for powering the infrastructure and moving it to the edges, right? So you become like OnlyFans, like almost like Dockerize it. Say, great, oh, you want to run this? We can let you run it like a Shopify. We push it out to the edges. And then what you do is you diffuse the risk, because now you have a bunch of individuals billing through, as opposed to like one large entity billing through, right? And so like the benefit of that is that it diffuses that risk. It maybe lessens some of the rate goes off the radar a little bit. And to some degree, this is the decentralized use case, right? It's like, instead of having one centralized place that handles everything, provide the tools, technology, and push it to the edges and let everyone have it, but then still keep in place the discoverability part, because you actually know about all these nodes and instances that exist, right? By the way, if you look at a Shopify doesn't have a centralized listing of all of the stores and whatnot in its ecosystem. And it's because it's a hard line to walk, right? So, I don't know. I mean, I've had some interesting points before, like in our Slack, by the way. We do have a Slack. And what he was pointing out was like, there's got to be something else going on here, right? Like, why are you even doing this, right? Like, if you've got $100 billion a year or $100 million a year floating in revenue, build your own damn stack, right? Or like, why do you need to raise money at all, right? Like, you can go independent. You can find someone who's willing to work with you. There was all this stuff. Remember, like, all the casinos used to be run out of the Isle of Man because it was like the only place in the world that like didn't care about like online gambling or something, right? There's got to be a way, and someone is going to fill this gap where they're willing to take on more risky sort of things like this. The fees may be higher, though. It may be like a 10% fee or something like that. It may be require holding dollars for longer as opposed to immediate exiting. Like, you can build a different system that is aware of this risk and actually certify. And so if I was OnlyFans, that's actually what I would probably be most investing my money in, is saying, how do we have the independence from the rest of this crap so that we can do what we want to do? Because it felt like they genuinely wanted to support and help this community grow, as well as they saw it as an interesting and good opportunity, like from a financial point of view. I would just try to own more of the stack, right? So I think there's a decentralized model for them, like push it out. There's a full stack model for them, like, fine, Stripe, you don't want my $1 billion a month in processing? I'll go build my own processing layer, right? Stripe built that crap. The two brothers built it on their own a long time ago. It's not like it's impossible to do, right? Go buy a bank, right, and run all your money through it, right? Like, so yeah, I don't know. That'd probably be my quick off the cuff advice.
Yeah, I think with what they have here is OnlyFans has a bunch of other problems. I think because the big part is that they're having difficulties looking for outside investors, right? They're looking.
Why do you need outside investors?
Right? I think, for some reason, maybe they want more money, right? Maybe they're in the fundraising mode, right? And so this is a way to get that. So it's like, maybe that's what you say. If they follow suit with what you want, what you're suggesting, obviously, buying a bank, setting up your own Stripe payment infrastructure, building out your stack, and so you own it. That requires, I would say, significant financial investment. So maybe OnlyFans doesn't have that, right? But another thing that I'm curious about is OnlyFans, with the elimination of adult content, pornography specifically, is that they are now, instead of running more like parallel tracks with Patreon, they are now going to run very close to each other. Like they will probably, if they don't already, conflict, right? Because it's like, you look at wholesome content on OnlyFans, the wholesome content on OnlyFans versus what do you get on like everything else on Patreon, which is like, I think people think on Patreon is, oh, that's just normal stuff on Patreon, right? It's like, oh, there's nothing illegal or illicit about that.
Leaving out the nature of content, though, and this is a good point they made on creator download as well. Or is it creator upload? Crap, I don't remember.
Creator upload.
Right, creator upload. But is just that, like, Patreon, OnlyFans itself actually is a far more sophisticated method of monetization for a creator than Patreon is, right? Patreon is very kind of like, like on off. It's like the primary mode for sort of monetization is like setting up memberships and that's it. I think you can also take like one-off payments basically, or donations. But OnlyFans allows like creating basically SKUs or products. They don't necessarily skew them up, right? But good point, Matt. Nudity is still allowed, by the way. You can't do that on Patreon. So you could still, like, if you're an adult, produce adult content, you still can't do that on Patreon, right? There's no point in trying to go move. Like, when people are like, oh, a lot more people are checking out Patreon, I'm like, you're idiots, right? Like, if you were on OnlyFans because you were doing adult content, the reason you were on OnlyFans is because Patreon didn't want you to begin with, right? So there's no reason to be going over to Patreon. Also, you'll be giving up more of the diversity in your revenue streams, right? Because like OnlyFans is designed to help you sell and promote those opportunities by through incentive programs, some of their marketing channels, the activity feed, also the more discrete buying options that they have in addition to sort of tipping and sort of plans, right? So until Patreon offers more of that and removes sort of this line, and by the way, it shows, right? Like, why, like Patreon, like relatively speaking, is like trying to catch up from a dollar's point of view from every point of view, from the number of creators, from the number of subs, from the number of dollars paid to creators, right? Patreon is way behind, right? But it shows the difference between sort of non-adult and adult content. And what some of those viabilities are. Now, not just the adult and non-adult parts, but also the diversity of having these multiple revenue models that a creator can employ, right? And so I think ultimately the big lesson for Patreon is get off your ass and start to move and diversify more of these products, right? Because creators don't want just one size fits all sort of solutions when it comes to their opportunities for monetizing. Right. And then, obviously, a couple of weeks ago, Jack Conte was interviewed on The Information. He was talking about the next generation of tools. I was like, yeah, sure. That's all great. I love it. Building that creator cash too. We think it's important. However, they still need diversity of revenue, right? Because not everyone can participate if you only offer subscriptions sort of as your opportunity.
Right. Cool. Well, I mean, I think going back to like the creator side of things, right? Their perspective, taking away the illegal and adult, the nature of it, right? Like, I'm a photographer, right? So I create all the, I photograph nature type of stuff, right? And I maybe want to put that out on, Instagram or whatever. I think what would you say to creators in terms of that advice?
Well, you're a photographer, Ken. Would you put your stuff on OnlyFans?
Not based off of not based off of OnlyFans' reputation. Right. I would go with Patreon. Yeah, and that's basically for me, that's a big deciding point is that reputation, because it's like, oh, I've heard of first of all, I've heard of Patreon.
Yeah,
I know people that have Patreons
that
accounts? Patrons, whatever that is. And I know people that are on OnlyFans, but it's like, I think in terms of just more of the wholesome side of things, like, and sorry, not wholesome, but the type of creators that I may want to be discovered alongside, and I don't know about the discoverability between both of the platforms, right? It might be complete garbage in of itself, right? But like, if Greg, you join up on Patreon and you're looking for people to follow or subscribe to, I want to be seen next to, a lot of these great photographers, right? Hey, if you're subscribed to Annie Leibovitz, then you might also be interested in being a patron of Ken, right? Because, I'm totally like an Annie Leibovitz type of photographer as it is, right? Not really. But I mean, that what would you say to creators who now, and you talked about this earlier in the show in terms of like, there's always somebody's your boss, right? With whether it's a Visa, MasterCard, these banks, whatever, stuff can turn on its head like in an instant, right? Very much to your point, like Instagram can change an API and whole businesses could get screwed. But for creators, what would you give their advice as they kind of now tread a little bit more carefully as starting like, oh, let me go full on YouTube creator. Let me go full on Instagram, blah, 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 or whatever. Let me do this, and only to find out that years later I could wind up getting, my ass handed to me?
So well, and I just want to be clear, I'm not defending the discoverability on OnlyFans,
Right.
but I think the brand itself provides sort of a layer of knownness, right? And OnlyFans relies on you having an audience that you're promoting it to ultimately, right? So let's just remember that a lot of these systems is like bring your own audience, right? So like if you're a creator today, and I think you're thinking about the future, like where you want to go, the reputational risk of a platform is sort of like an important aspect, right? It's much like would you feel like, does your brand feel comfortable advertising in men's bathrooms, right, or billboards on the highway, right? Now, both can be an effective tool. Is it a reasonable tool, or is it a thing that you want to have a brand association with, right? Like I think is important, right? Like for you to consider. The other thing to remember though, Ken, and we've seen this in the past, platforms, because they evolve or change, can have a different meaning later in life or in different versions. Sometimes they get rebooted, right, in one way or another, especially with early stage startups where it's a highly iterative process. You're not necessarily clear where they're going to end up or what they're going to be. It's sort of an inherent risk, right? I think this goes back to our primary point almost always for all creators is build your own platform, message yourself the way you want to be messaged, leverage the tools that drive and create revenue and opportunities for you, right? And then eliminate the ones that don't work well for you as you learn and discover that that's the case, right? But I do think, like, just relatively speaking, folks out there, creators out there looking at and evaluating any platform always have to sort of take into account, what are the things I get, and do the cost or the value of that outweigh sort of doing it on my own, right? And there's always that build versus buy sort of discussion, right? Now, could most people execute, like this is a discussion we were having about Substack, could most people execute Substack on their own? Probably, actually, right? Like Substack is not complicated, right? Like setting up an email, you could use Constant Contact, you could use Mailchimp, you could accomplish what Substack does in lots of other ways, right? Fairly cheaply, and on your own, right? So is there a reason you need a Substack? No, right? Why do people go to Substack? They're not
network effect.
Network effect, right? There's some discoverability. And again, like you look at Substack when it started, it was a bunch of independent, decentralized, sort of like, hey, we provide the technology. Then they brought their reader experience and sort of like cross-promotional stuff, right? So I think discoverability is still this big problem that like we're going to have in the creator space for a long time. It's going to continue to grow. It's going to continue to evolve. It's going to be increasingly important to the extent that decentralization is successful, right? And certainly to the extent that there are more platforms that creators are leveraging to sort of get to the future that they want, right? Right. Regardless of if that's a decentralized platform or not, just the fact that there are 30 tools to do X means that suddenly creators are more decentralized than they were previously when they didn't have this at all, or you only had it in one place, right? So I think build your own presence, screw these other platforms, but leverage them, right? Like you should be leveraging them as a business person, as a channel to acquire customers, as a provider of technologies and tools and services that you need to execute your business, right? As an opportunity to learn what works well for other people, right? But you should not be wholly dependent on any of them, right? And you should start building that future yesterday, right? And then continue to pull into it, right? So I think, like, can you have a Patreon and an OnlyFans? Absolutely. Like, why not? Like, they're not mutually exclusive. It's just that maybe the stuff that you do that is more above board is going to be on your Patreon, and maybe the stuff that you do, like there may be people who don't want to even have an OnlyFans charge on their account, right? Much the same point. Like if you're a married person, do you want your spouse saying like that you're paying for OnlyFans? That may also look bad, right? But maybe it's more acceptable, it's reasonable to be supporting someone as a patron, right?
Right.
So give your customers the choices, let them tell you where they want you to be. That's what good customer development ultimately does. And I would work towards those ends.
But I mean, you worry about, like, for example, if you do a Patreon, you do an OnlyFans, you worry about that double, as a creator, you worry about that double billing, right? In terms of the tax on you from these platforms. And I get what you're saying in terms of like, diverse. It's almost like creators have to diversify what they're offering. It's like, don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? And
Sure. It's
but
like every smart business owner.
but it runs a sort of contradictory to some of the creators that we've been talking to, who kind of put all their eggs largely in one basket, right? They're
Well,
largely on a Twitch, they're largely on YouTube, or all in on.
There's a distinction there, though, right? So, for example, your primary distribution point might be Twitch, say, right? But that doesn't mean that your primary monetization is Twitch. Like, you could then also still monetize through, subs, through merch, through courses, right? So the diversities should be around your revenue, and ideally around your distribution, right? But like, I'm less worried about. Oh, sorry, it's probably a fairly close concern to only have one distribution point as well. However, I think the better thing to make sure you have is revenue distribution, right? And so inherently and usually what happens is, for creators in particular, getting income distribution or like monetization diversification, right? Usually means using more than one social platform as well at the same time, right? So I think that's like, you sort of inherently pick it up, but you could be purely YouTube and also have 9 revenue streams, right? Now, is that the best bet for you? Maybe not. But what it does mean is just make sure you have your videos. Make sure you have the ability to host them on your own if YouTube decided they didn't want to host them anymore, right? Now, that's easy to stand up, but here's the thing I was pointing out before. You may take for granted how much it costs to host and serve 1 million views of, a 1 gigabyte video, right? The economies of scale that you are getting, right, or the value exchange there is very different. And so this is my point, is that most creators don't have a strong purview into actually the hidden costs in doing it. I've been thinking about this, and I know we have to go. I've been thinking about us doing a series, Ken, where we actually try to recreate like a service or something. Like,
it's almost like a hackathon you could do.
Yeah, but to just show someone, like, okay, like, how could you recreate Substack? What would it cost you to run Substack? What would it cost you to run your own YouTube with this much traffic and having to serve it? It'd be interesting to just show people the comparison, because I think like a lot of people are kind of blinded to the actual cost, leaving out the marketing part, which would be a whole separate a different amount of money that we'd have to look at on the spend of.
Well, let's see if somebody can join us on the show and kind of really help map that out, right? So
yeah,
if that's something that you can do,
hit us up.
Yeah. All right.
Well, it's been an interesting show. I know we've got a bit to get back to, but thank you for being here with us this week. Always a lively discussion. And as you know, we are super passionate about the space. We hope that you will find us soon. Coming up, though, just to quickly point out, we have Martin Walvern from Garden coming up next week. Creative Briefs again once more. Antonio and Stephen will be joining us from the Black Creator Crew soon as well on September 1st. We do have Jim Lowry currently scheduled September 8th, but if you'd like to be a guest, head over to createeconomy.com. You can find a link there to how to become a guest of our show. We are booked up right now through October, however, but you're always welcome to join us for the deep dives and for the news as well. So feel free to hit us up. And with that, we will see you soon. Ken, talk to you soon, buddy.
Laters.